Hello, I am Ralph Cinque, and I would like to speak to you today about my movie, My Stretch of Texas Ground. It started in a very mundane way. I was vegging out watching Andy of Mayberry on TV when the thought popped into my head, what would happen if terrorists came to Mayberry? How would Andy Taylor deal with it? But then my very next thought was, but if I were going to write a story about this, he would have to be a Texas sheriff. Because after all, I am a big, tall Texan. And I have lived in this state for over 40 years. And believe me, it grows on you. So I knew that my sheriff would have to be a Texas sheriff. But I also knew that if I was going to do this, that it would have to be more than just entertainment. That I wanted it to be meaningful. I wanted it to have an important message. And the message concerns war and terrorism. And the message is that as monstrous and evil as terrorism is, and we all agree that it is monstrous and evil, that the actual fact is that war kills more people than terrorism. If I use my right hand to represent the number of people who've been killed by terrorism, and you probably can't see it because it's so low, then my left hand, which you may also not be able to see, represents the number of people who have been killed by war. There's really no comparison between the two. In 2015, the Physicians for Social Responsibility hired Nobel Prize-winning researchers who determined that since 9/11, that at a very minimum, 1.3 million people have been killed in the wars. And of course, 4 years have passed since then, and there has been a lot of continued fighting, particularly in Syria, but also in Afghanistan and other places. And without a doubt, the death toll has risen substantially since then. So I wanted to send the message that war is the most deadly thing that there is, and that the very idea of crossing an ocean to start a war, that it needs to be completely rejected and renounced as a monstrous thing, that civilized people aren't going to do it, and they're not even going to threaten to do it, that this has to be abandoned and completely renounced. That's the message of the movie, and it's something that I feel very strongly about. But I also knew that this was art. This was going to be entertainment. It had to be fun. It had to be engrossing. And the word I like to use is immersing. I refer to that as the idea that a story can pull you in to such an extent that it wipes clean the whole slate of your mind temporarily while you're immersed in the story, where nothing else exists for you except what's happening on the screen. Now, I'm not going to tell you there's been a lot of movies that have immersed me that way, but there have been some. I'd like to give you a couple examples. One is Apocalypto by Mel Gibson, where Jaguar Paw is being dragged away by vicious Mayan thugs, being taken to the Mayan capital to be killed in a sacrifice to their gods. And all the while, he knows that his trapped pregnant wife and son are going to die if he does. So that's the predicament that he's in and has to get out of. And as I watched that, nothing else existed for me. There was just the plight of Jaguar Paw. Another example is the movie Babel, which was written by the great Mexican screenwriter Guillermo Arriaga. And in it, an American tourist couple are on a bus tour of Morocco, and while going through a very remote, unpopulated area, there's a freak, bizarre shooting on the bus that they're on, and then it instantly becomes a life and death struggle to get her medical help and to save her life. And as I think you probably know, Arriaga likes to write his movies with multiple storylines. That story had 3 simultaneous storylines, and they don't come together completely until close to the end. He wrote another movie called The Burning Plain, which has 2 storylines. And that was very good too. At first you're a little confused as to what one has to do with the other, but you don't mind because both of them are so interesting that you're willing to wait to find out how they're linked together. Now, in my case, I tried to duplicate that to some extent because there are 2 separate storylines in the movie where we're with this Mujahideen warrior, Abdul Latif Hassan, where he is on a mission to assassinate a Texas senator who is a very aggressive war hawk. And he, in a very clever way, figures out the most opportune time and place to target him. And as you can imagine, it's going to turn out to be within the turf of this small town Texas sheriff, Joe Howden. And when the camera is on Joe's life, we're learning about his home life, his family life, and also his workaday life as the sheriff. And in some ways, it's very much like Andy of Mayberry in that he is the linchpin of the town, that all of the problems and disputes within the town are brought to him to settle. He has a lot of frustrations. He's not as happy-go-lucky as Andy of Mayberry, far from it. But on the other hand, he's just as dedicated to his job to protect the people of his town. And the dynamic between these 2 characters and the inevitable and pending collision that is coming between them, that's what I used to pull the audience in and to immerse them in the story so that they would absolutely have to find out what is going to happen when Howden clashes with Hassan. Of course, also at stake is the fate of the senator, who is played brilliantly and very colorfully by Mike Gassaway. But that is going to depend on what happens between Howden and Hassan. So really, it all comes down to them. Now, whether we succeeded at fully immersing the audience in the story, it's not for me to say. I realize that. It's for others to say. But to whatever extent we did it, the credit goes to these 2 men, these 2 actors, Jeff Weber and Eunice Zadi. Jeff's rendering of Sheriff Joe Howden is brilliant. On the one hand, he portrays him as this regular guy, down to earth, totally unpretentious, not the least bit full of himself. But on the other hand, there's an air about him that this guy can cope with anything. That no matter what is coming down the pike, Sheriff Joe can handle it. That's the vibe that Jeff Weber gives off. You know, I really believe that people go to movies to experience characters that they can admire and look up to. And Jeff Weber has given us such a character in Sheriff Joe. And it may be because people just don't have that many heroes in their real life. But in any case, I think that Jeff Weber has given us a screen lawman that is every bit as great as any screen lawman that you can name from the movies or from television. And I'm very pleased with Jeff and grateful for what he did. Now, with Hassan, we have Yunus Zadi playing him. And the thing about Abdul Latif Hassan is you realize from the very beginning that he is regarded like a Superman among his people. That there is nothing that he can't do. There is nobody who can stop him. And that he is like a force of nature that simply can't be stopped. So the story is that we have this irresistible force that's going to meet this immovable object. And when they clash, it explodes. So that's the setting for the story. And again, I think that these guys did a brilliant job of just creating this dynamic between these two very interesting and compelling characters. The message of the movie gets told, but not in a way that interferes with the drama or in any way burdens the audience. It's still a very fast-paced, compelling thriller. And more than anything else, I would tell you that this movie is unique. There is absolutely nothing else like it. It's a movie that Hollywood would never make. And I think that at the very least, you are going to have a very novel and very original cinematic experience if you watch it. So, thank you for listening to this. And please add to your watch list my stretch of Texas Ground. Thank you.